Are you ready to get casual? Grab your favorite adult beverage or combustible plant and join us for our roundtable TTRPG discussion. Oh yeah, it's time for Casual Friday. And now, here are your hosts.
Woo! Welcome to the show. We're the Landlocked Warlocks, and this is Casual Friday. As you may notice, Ryan is not here with us, and after what he did, honestly, I'd be surprised if we see him ever again. Anyway, moving on. I'm GM Jim from Wizards and Wordslingers. Over there is...
I'm Brad from Dire Den.
And our special guest...
Hi, I'm Sean from Delver.
Hey everyone, welcome to the show. How are you doing out there in comment land? Let us know. So let me tell you what we are going to talk about on the show today. We're going to talk about a new adventure that's coming out for Candela Obscura. We are going to talk to this guy right down here about a crazy writing experience that he had last week. We are going to talk about a new Blades in the Dark expansion that's coming out. We're going to step into Jim's corner for a second because I have a very interesting homebrew rule to talk about, something that I actually thought of about 2 hours ago. It happened while I was walking this morning. I was on my morning walk.
You're brave to throw it out there that fresh.
I feel good about it. I feel good. Stay tuned. You're going to like this. Then we have a question of the week and what's becoming a recurring series of me detailing arguments I had with people online. If I had a nickel for every time, it'd be 10 cents, but it's odd that it happened twice. Then if we have, depending on how much time we have at the end, we're going to talk about the new Dungeon Master's Guide. We'll let Sean give his overall thoughts because Brad and I gave our overall thoughts last week. And we're going to talk about Chapter 1 and maybe even Chapter 2 if there's time. Probably not, though. I didn't prepare Chapter 2, so I'm probably not going to. I'm going to cut it short before we get there. Anyway, Jason, this is Casual Friday. Welcome to it. How you doing, bud? Okay, so there is a new adventure coming out for Candela Obscura, the system that was released by Darrington Press, the publishing arm of Critical Role. This came out last year, and from what I understand, it is a lot like Call of Cthulhu in that it's investigative, and it is very horror themed. I know that Critical Role put on some not one shots but like 4 shots, a few different ones within Candela Obscura. I tried to watch one. It was so boring. I only made it about an hour, and I was like, this is too dour. It's not fun at all, and I couldn't make it through. Brad or Sean, do you guys have any experience with Candela?
I mean, very similar experience to you. I'm curious. I'm interested. I want to try to play the game, but I have, like you, attempted to watch Candela Obscura live streams, and they haven't hooked me. No.
Yeah, for me, I initially got into it when they announced that they were going to be releasing the system. So I got super excited. I downloaded like the starting packet. I was planning on purchasing it. It hit at a time in my life where I was just really into investigative stories, a lot of more like turn of the century crime and mystery and supernatural horror. So it was a perfect time for me. And then I saw the final product come out and I watched some reviews, and it was talking about how there wasn't even a mechanic for what happens if you died. And I was like, that's a big turning point for me where I'm like, I'm not interested in until it like kind of caught up to where I think it could be playable. I never watched any of the live streams. I saw that they happened, but I got a sense that it was just a little too slow for my liking.
Yeah, I have I haven't played Candela, but I read the quick start guide when it came out. Here's my story about that. When they put out the quick start guide, it was about a year ago. I was newer-ish to making YouTube videos, and I really, really wanted to ride the wave because I thought it was going to be big. So when the quick start guide came out, I got up at like 4 o'clock in the morning. I read through it. I wrote a script, and I recorded it at 7 o'clock in the morning. So if you see my Candela Obscura video, my eyes are completely bloodshot because it's 7 o'clock in the morning. Also, I had just moved into a new place and hadn't really fully set up my audio, so the audio's terrible. But if you want, if you want to watch a bad YouTube video about Candela Obscura, I made one. It is not a good video. The video did pretty well, though. I mean, it kind of worked. I got like 2,000 views in that first day, which was, I think, probably my best at that time. Anyway, something else I found interesting about this is that it's the Darrington Press's game, but it is being produced by Beetle and Grimm, which is kind of puzzling because they're mostly known for advanced, like, special editions of existing products. But it does say no design team has been announced, so we don't know if actually, like, Beetle and Grimm wrote this or if Darrington Press wrote it, and Darrington just wanted to release it through Beetle and Grimm, maybe because they're cheaper printing. I don't know. I just found that was interesting.
It is interesting. Well, we talked about last time when we were talking about Call of Cthulhu, right? The handouts are an important part of investigative type games. Mm-hmm. And maybe, Beetle and Grimm was the right choice when it came to producing a game with a bunch of handouts and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I've never heard of Beetle and Grimm before. I'm looking into it now. I didn't catch that on my first read through. I just assumed it was like a subsidiary of something else, but it looks like it's Matthew Lillard's co-company.
Yeah.
He's a co-founder of it.
Yeah, isn't that wild?
Yeah, I know he had like what was it? Some sort of alcohol that he was selling related to like RPGs and stuff, but I didn't know he was co-founder of a tabletop company.
Also, do you remember like a couple of years ago when there were D&D nerds in the at the grocery stores and stuff?
I go to the grocery stores all the time. Thank you.
Well, you could get D&D nerds, and that was apparently Beetle and Grimm. It was Matthew Lillard's idea, and he pitched it to Wizards and made it happen. So that was
crazy.
like a Beetle and Grimm Wizards of the Coast collab to make D&D flavored nerds.
But yeah, they do like high-end upgrades to existing adventures is the thing they're most known for.
Yeah.
So like was it Tomb of Annihilation? They did one special edition with that, and it came with like all these detailed maps and all sorts of crazy cool extras and stuff like that. I think did they do the special edition Strahd one that came in that cool coffin-shaped box?
Yeah, they did the Strahd one that split it into different books and came with a Taraka deck and a bunch of other accoutrements.
Okay. Yeah, I just always assumed that was Wizard Direct, but you're saying there's this company that kind of does that specialty?
Yeah, Beetle and Grimm just takes the product and then adds in a bunch of handouts and other stuff so they can sell it for $200.
They're like Shelby back in the day, who used to do like custom upgrades of different race cars, sports cars.
So the next thing on the agenda to talk about is this guy down here did something pretty incredible earlier this week. Sean, you participated in at least 50% of NaNoWriMo in one single day. And we wanted to talk to you about your experience with that. What was it like?
It was pretty crazy. It came from this idea of I had participated in NaNoWriMo. For those who don't know, National Novel Writing Month. The goal is to reach 50,000 words by typing about 1,776 words per day. And the big objective is to turn off your brain and write. Something that a lot of us who enjoy writing struggle with because we like to self-edit. So I had gotten to like 21,000 in the past, but then life takes over. I wouldn't be able to finish. So I decided I'm going to write 25,000 in one single day. I'm going to beat my previous record by a fair bit. And the main reason for that is it might seem like it was more for the challenge, but it's more so because of time constraints. I got a new job. I'm about to graduate from university, so my schedule is packed. And I was like, I really only have one day to do any of this. So I sat down and I was like, I'm gonna go through and write that 25,000. And we started in the morning, and I started typing, and I finished about 9 hours later. My partner Caitlin left for work and came home in the same time that it took me to write that. And at the beginning, I was vibrant. I think I pumped out 4,000 words in the first hour. And from there, it went, I think I ended around 2,000 words per hour. And it was less about the typing, like the motions of going through it, although like my shoulder and like elbow hurt. But it was more so about coming up with topics that could generate enough words. And I started taking, suggestions from the chat. I started like looking up lists just to find something. And it still was just incredibly taxing. But the thing is, as soon as I was done, I went downstairs, I like sat for like 2 minutes, and then we decorated for Christmas. So like, it was like, it was almost like no like recovery time afterward. The next day, my fingers were a little sore, but it wasn't too bad, which I was really surprised about. But so we reached 25,076 words because I wrote like a short introductory thing. And the crazier part about all of that is people in my life that then went and watched the stream, like my mom, starts texting me over the course of the next few days like, hey, I saw this part. I'm like, what? Are you like reading what I'm writing on the stream? Because I didn't release the document. There's no control F. They're sitting there and reading me writing the paragraph. And I was like, oh my God. Well, yeah, it was just stream of consciousness, no plan to it. Went in with no ideas in my head beforehand, and then just vomited words onto the page.
Nice. I've done NaNoWriMo a few times. I've never done 25,000 words in a day. The most I ever wrote in one day was 10,000 words, and I was pretty proud of myself. 25K is quite impressive. I know NaNoWriMo has kind of gotten in some trouble this year. Yeah. Maybe it was last year too, but we don't need to talk about that. But a pretty impressive achievement, 25,000 words in one day. Do you think this is something other people should do? Do you think this is something people should try at least once?
I would say if you are struggling like I am to stay on that schedule, I have diagnosed ADHD, so it's difficult for me to focus long-term on things. So if you're really just looking to push yourself, I'd say go ahead and give it a shot. I don't recommend it unless you're looking for that level of needless achievement because it means nothing. I'm not publishing my memoir with what I wrote, but what I would suggest is people engage in NaNoWriMo itself. Shut your brain off. And that was the biggest thing I took away from this, the ability to shut my brain off to some degree and just write, which is something I am jealous of in artists and authors like Brandon Sanderson, just to get stuff onto the page and make it so incredible down the road, like through the editing process, which is something I'm constantly doing in my own writing, which is a little bit of a burden. So that's the biggest thing I recommend for people. Just engage in NaNoWriMo proper.
Well, nice. There you go. Brad, do you have anything else about that, or are you ready to move on?
I just want to know, did you ever do the Where the Wild Things Are as a one-shot for D&D?
So you put in that suggestion, and I remember typing it out. It literally started with, I'm 27 years old now. I do not remember the story of how the wild. And I was like, I remember like the general gist, if I remember correct, like they think he's one of them and then they learn that he isn't. So I was like, I would make it like on a time limit. Like you had a certain amount of time to get off the island before they realized, or something like that. That was all I could come up with my limited knowledge of it.
That's one of my favorite books by Maurice Sendak.
Yeah. That's why I threw it in there, because it's one of my favorite books from when I was a kid. So when you were like, I need more topics, I'm like, what about this?
Yeah, I've had the chance to read that book to my son several times in the last few years, and it is a beautifully written book. It is some of my favorite prose ever. The line about the walls becoming the vines is incredible. I love that part. Anyway, moving on. The next thing we want to talk about is that there is an expansion for Blades in the Dark coming out called Deep Cuts. And I wanted to detail with it's only $10. I'm on John Harper's itch page. It comes with new factions, new heritage and backgrounds. It says new innovations in technology. So this is things like guns. And then it has 6 modular rule systems, which I'm going to talk about that in a second. The fact that they're modular. New harm and trauma. New advancement system. Diceless downtime, which downtime in Blades in the Dark can be kind of too gamey sometimes. So that's very interesting. A modified load system. And a new action system. And what's interesting here is that these kind of seem like a lot of rules, right? It seems like a lot of optional rules. Well, I listened to this podcast earlier this week. It's called Dice Exploder, where a guy, the Dice Exploder guy, I don't know his name, he was interviewing John Harper about this game, and he asked him, why didn't you make this into a second edition? And I thought what John Harper said was incredibly interesting. He said that he had started out with the intent to write a second edition, but then, that he has a license for his game, Forged in the Dark, so other creators can create for it. He said as he started to make his second edition, he realized he was going to be breaking dozens and dozens of products out there that people were using to make money, and he didn't want to do that to the community. And I thought that was an amazing thing to say. To actually consider the community before releasing his new product. So he instead decided just to release them as optional rules, so it wouldn't mess with anything that anyone has made or will make under the Forged in the Dark license, which that's incredible. What a good dude.
Yeah. I love the idea of modular rules. I think that's fantastic. And that's a great way to accomplish what you would accomplish with a second edition, but give that freedom to your player base to choose what they want their second edition of the game to look like by adding, picking and choosing, right, their modular rules. So I think that's brilliant from a design perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have a lot of background with Blades in the Dark, but anything and any creator that focuses on growing their community, not only is it, incredibly, I don't know the word, virtuous, but it's also just good business sense. It makes the community more active, more likely to engage with you in the product, and more likely to grow through third-party material.
Yeah. I wish more game companies would think like that. Like what you just said, Sean, is like, I think what needs to be at the heart of game design, right, is like you design with your community in mind to build a better and healthier community around your game. And at least theoretically, that should make you more money in the long term than trying to squeeze your game with a second edition or expansion books and all that sort of stuff. I think the tabletop wargaming community has really latched on to that idea, and is probably about 10 years ahead of the RPG community in that respect. The tabletop wargaming has had a huge push towards independent games and miniatures agnostic games where you can use any miniatures with the game that people are publishing, and it's building really great communities around a lot of great independent games. It's really been neat to watch the community grow from this community that was so dominated by Games Workshop for decades, and now the community is diversifying in a lot of cool ways.
I've never actually played Blades in the Dark, but I have the rule book and I've read it cover to cover, and I think it's a fantastic system. I made a video about rules you should steal from it. I tweeted it at John Harper, and he liked it, so I take that as his tacit approval. of of stealing the rules. But I will say, Z Bashu made a video about this a few years ago where he talked about how his players wanted him to run a heist. And so he got Blades in the Dark and he read it, and then he ran a heist for them. And he said afterward that he wished that he had just tweaked D&D to be a little more heisty instead of trying to run it in a whole new system. And that video, for some reason, was not controversial. But, a lot of us have said the same things before, that it's fine to alter D&D to make it work like you want. And that makes some people very, very upset. But I will say this, that Blades in the Dark has two of my all-time favorite TTRPG rules that I use absolutely all the time. And one is progress clocks. It's so simple and so effective. The GM can use it. The players can use it. Everybody can use it. It's a great currency and organization system to have at the table, progress clocks. The second is the Devil's Bargain. I love the Devil's Bargain. I love when the players in that situation, the Devil's Bargain is when they almost hit or they come close to succeeding. You as the GM can offer them to flip that failure to a success, but it comes at a cost. I absolutely love that. I love seeing what players what they will take in order to succeed. That's very interesting. I'll turn that miss into a hit, but you're going to end up prone with the fire elemental standing right on top of you. Okay. And that's very exciting for me.
I'm going to have to try that Devil's Bargain. I haven't done that.
It's really fun. Yeah. If they come within three or four, you say, how bad do you want to hit? How bad do you want to turn that into a hit? Let's make a deal.
It feels like a one of the things I really like from Powered by the Apocalypse and games like Dungeon World is that ability to succeed, to fail, and then succeed with stipulations. Like that little middle ground is something that you don't normally see in D&D. It's usually fairly binary what happens, and I like the idea of being able to introduce catch-22s into an encounter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've run RPGs for elementary school kids, especially neurodivergent elementary school kids, and that success with failure, right? That kind of that middle option. It's really interesting to watch kids engage with that mechanic and how they interpret what's good, what's bad for their character. It was cool to watch kids with different perspectives apply that in game. It was really neat.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Monkey's paw. Yeah. Anybody have anything else to say about Blades in the Dark?
It's at the top of my list to play. One of the reasons I haven't run it is because I want to play it first. I want to find someone who wants to run it, and I want to experience it as a player. I don't know why I made that decision, but I really want to experience it as a player. I think because I don't want to impose my my bias from D&D and other skill-based games. I'm afraid that if I just ran it, I'd end up running it too much like games I already know. So I want to experience it first. I want to really know what the Blades in the Dark experience is like.
That's fair.
Yeah, I bought it at one of my local stores. I have it right here, but I've never played it. But I haven't played it for the same reason that I haven't played the Transformers RPG that I bought and the Mouse Guard RPG. It's primarily just I have so much going on in terms of games, and with the release of 2024, that's just been shepherded over into learning that system and making sure that I have everything under control there, that it's been difficult to get into a new system. We used to have this group. I mean, we still do. We're planning on running Cyborg soon. We call ourselves the Play Questers, and it's not on YouTube or anything. It's just a couple of friends, and we switch off DMing and we just run different systems. So we tried Avatar Legends. We tried Thirsty Sword Lesbians. We tried some like expansions for D&D. I forget what it was, like some sort of Kickstarter. And we just go through these different systems and play, and it really fun, but we just haven't gotten around to Blades in the Dark yet.
All right. Oh, go ahead, Brad.
Oh, I was just say, I'm kind of in the boat where like the one other player in my group who started DMing ended up moving away, so I'm back to being the only DM in my group. And we ran a whole bunch of different games last year, but Blades in the Dark didn't make the cut, unfortunately.
So now it's going to make a deep cut.
There you go. Well played. All right, so moving on real quick, if you guys don't mind, if we stop by Jim's Corner for just a second.
This again.
So, you guys can make your own graphics. You can have your own corner. There's nothing stopping you. So, I don't know if anyone out there listens to Not Another D&D podcast, NADPod. Well, it's the best D&D podcast there is. It's bar none the best actual play. But anyway, so they have this recurring bit. Every couple of months they do an episode that they call Turtle Tank, which is it's like Shark Tank. What they do is they have Patreon subscribers submit homebrew rules, and then they debate if they want to invest any of their turtle eggs into the ideas. It's hilarious. It's incredible. NADPod, Not Another D&D podcast. If you're not listening to it, you should. Well, anyway, I was listening to NADPod. I was listening to Turtle Tank on my morning walk, and this Patreon subscriber pitched an idea where the players could convert a D20 roll into a D100 roll. But after they used it, then the DM would get to do the same thing against them. And the turtles shot down the idea. They didn't like it because they were like, what's the point of rolling an 87 to hit? An 87 isn't better than a 17, better than like a 25. But so what I thought was, I was thinking about that idea. What if at the beginning of a session or the beginning of a campaign, the players as a collective get one nat 20 that they can spend. They can spend this nat 20 whenever they want, but once they spend it, now they have to choose between them who's going to spend it, right? So one player can spend this nat 20. After they spend it, then it goes to the DM. Then the DM has a nat 20 that they can spend whenever they want, but when they spend it, it then goes back to the players. So each side, at all times, one side will have a nat 20 in their pocket they can use. And so just imagine being a player and you're in combat and the DM has the nat 20 and your turn's coming up and you're thinking, oh, if I had that nat 20, what I could, I'm a paladin, I'll put in my 4th level divine smite, but you have to wait for the DM to spend it. You don't want the DM to spend that nat 20 against you, but you know that once they do, then you'll have it back as a resource you can spend. So I don't know. I came up with that this morning. What do you think, chat? What do you think? Brad and Sean, what do you guys think about that?
I think it sounds cool. I might actually use that next time I run Shadow Dark, because I definitely, Shadow Dark is such a streamlined system. I like throwing optional rules in there to kind of spice the gameplay up a little bit. So that's Shadow Dark's where I tend to test out new homebrew ideas, because it's less likely to mess things up, and then see how I like it, and then I'll transpose it over to 5e when I run that. This is a mechanic in a game I've played. It's in the Star Wars RPG. There are these things called light and dark side dice. And so the players, I believe at the beginning of the session, roll to see how many light side or dark sides they get. And it's like a dice pool system. So adding a light side into your dice pool really helps to improve the chances of rolling well. So what happens is you use that light side token, it then becomes a dark side token, which means the DM gets to use that to impose some sort of disadvantage against the group. But once that happens, it switches back to a light side token. I really like this idea a lot because I tried something in my former campaign we just wrapped up called plot points, which was the replacement for inspiration. And it was basically the players had the ability to take control of the narrative briefly
to kind of really help themselves out. And if they didn't, by the end of like a main adventure, they could use their plot point to get extra XP on top of the adventure XP. That very quickly blew out of proportion because it was either they were used to just win the game or the players reached level 20 in a few sessions. And so I like this idea a lot more, having like a floating singular plot pointer nat 20 that the players then, like, oh, we need to use this. But once they do, I get to use it and pull it out against them. I really like that idea a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the idea of a floating plot point. That's pretty cool too. We played our second game of the new 2024 D&D last night, and I didn't really plan ahead well, considering that the whole point of this new campaign is to try out the new D&D rules. And I planned a murder investigation, so we used we used one skill roll, in our session last night. It was all role play, so there weren't any 2024 game mechanics being used at all last night. But yeah, my we all had fun, but it was we're talking about like Candela Obscura and Blades in the Dark, like more investigation style, heist style games, and so that's what we did last night, and it was it turned into all role play, which was not what I expected, but it was fun. And Vorpal Bite mentioned in the chat about back in 1974 when he started playing D&D, there were no skills, and that's what last night's session was like. It was all role play as they investigated this murder mystery.
Well, you heard it right here from Brad. You can still have fun playing 2024 Dungeons and Dragons, in case you were concerned about that. We are not sponsored by WotC, but it would be nice if they sent us some free stuff. Other YouTubers get free stuff. Where's my free stuff? That's why I got into this, was to get free books, to get free Dungeon Master screens and crap like that, dice spinners. Give me all the stuff.
But part of the point of all that was to say, like, I was really proud of my players. You're talking about, Sean talking about plot points, and I've been giving more creative freedom, like more space at least for creative freedom for my players to, like, inform the setting, right? And so my players are all playing new characters because this is only week 2 of the campaign, and my players are like, wait a second, I know a guy, and they're just like, they're making up their own NPCs as we're doing this investigation. And I thought that was really cool that they're helping, create the world as I've been giving them more freedom, kind of like you're talking about plot points, right? Like, so I was proud of my players for engaging in the game more in that way.
Nice. Okay, so the next thing on our agenda is that I'm talking to you, yes, you, the person watching this right now, you need to go open up a new tab, go to youtube.com/@landlockedwarlocks and subscribe. Go subscribe right now. Not in this tab. Don't go away from the video. Control T on Windows, Command T on a Mac. Open up the new tab, youtube.com. Have I made myself clear? Okay. Landlocked Warlocks. Go subscribe to us on YouTube. That is our new home, or our shared home currently.
I just subbed.
Thank you, Sean.
Nice.
No problem.
Nice. Okay, next we are finally going to be getting into our first main topic, I guess. Although I don't know how the discussion around this is going to go. We'll see. Mike, thank you for subscribing to Landlocked Warlocks. So I had a discussion, no, let me start over. So earlier this week, I saw a social media post, and I commented on it, and then I was thinking about the person's post and my comment for a couple of days, and I wanted to discuss this here because I think there's something very worthwhile discussing here. This person said, just watched a video about video game storytelling getting more subtle. Nope. All video game storytelling equates to get the key for this door, with either of those things being metaphorical or real. That's not a bad thing, but let's not pretend games tell meaningful stories. Even BioShock and Brothers did this. And I'm not bringing this up to have an argument about whether video games tell good stories. That's not the point. Not obviously, there's some video games telling amazing stories out there, end of discussion. But, so what I said was, couldn't you say that get the key to the door is basically the storytelling concept for all stories? Because he's saying in video games, you get the key to the door, which in a video game, it's part of the gameplay loop. In a novel, there is no gameplay loop, but get the key to the door is the point of every, like 98% of works of fiction that have ever been produced about a guy who wants to get the key to the door so he can go through the door. That's what fiction is about, people struggling against conflict. So my question, the reason I'm bringing all this up is video games and tabletop role-playing games are a unique storytelling medium in that they have this separate element of the gameplay loop that, you know, movies and TVs just have narrative. They don't have a gameplay loop involved. You consume them. But games actually have the story and they have the gameplay loop. And my question is, are those two things like married? Do they proceed along the same path? Are they separate? Does one create the other? Does the narrative create the gameplay loop, or does the gameplay loop create the narrative? And open the floor for discussion.
I think to some degree, I think in an ideal situation, they are similar, they are synonymous, they're influential on one another. I think that in a lot of cases they are separate. In the terms of, like, you know, you sit down, you plan an encounter, you have it relate to the narrative, but as a dungeon master, the narrative is not directly created by yourself. It's created by the loop, as you said. There's two different ways of viewing that as well. There's story versus plot. I think plot more directly relates to the gameplay loop of roleplay, of combat, everything that the game is. The story is what is derived from that loop, what emotions you feel. Because if you put a player up against a giant ogre boss, that's the fight. To defeat them is the plot, but the story is like man versus man. What does this orc represent to the player characters? So I think the story and narrative comes out of the loop and is influenced by it, but I think they are still two separate entities.
What say you, Brad?
I'm just taking everything that Sean just said in, trying to yeah, I mean, I think overall I agree, and I think good game design puts the two closer together, right? You know, we've talked before about how, like, you can use Dungeons and Dragons for just about any style of play, right? Like, I was just using it last night for murder investigation. But, you know, is D&D always the best choice? And are there other games out there that reinforce theme or like the game mechanics reinforce a certain type of story that you want to tell, right? And I think that's like Sean said, I think I agree that the two are different, but they are closely connected. And I think certain games is more closely connected than others, if that makes sense.
Tabletop games are really the only storytelling medium where you can intend to tell one story and an entirely different one comes out.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's sort of like happens in improv, except in improv they don't intend to tell a story. They intend to just go, and then a story comes out of it. But in D&D, you intend to tell a particular kind of story most of the time, right? Like Brad said, he was running an investigative game. Well, his players could have decided to become jerks and start a fight in the tavern, and then it's no longer an investigating game. Now it's a brawl in the town, and then running from the town guard and hiding in the woods outside of town, and that's the session, and that's the story that happened. So I guess is it the gameplay loop that causes the story to go in that direction? You know, we're talking about like you intend to have a heroic moment, but you roll a nat 1. And in that moment, the gameplay loop is directly affecting where the story goes next.
Mm-hmm.
But the type of story also affects the gameplay loop, you know, because Brad didn't stock that town with a ton of monsters probably because he wasn't expecting combat. So the story affected the kind of the gameplay loop his players experienced while they were in the city.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. And along with that, you're exactly right. The type of characters the players bring to the table also informs the story, right? The murder investigation, of course, it's D&D, so there's like the supernatural element to it, and it could have become like a very creepy, serious, you know, kind of, you know, Candela Obscura style game. But all of my players, their characters, they dumped intelligence. So like, so the highest intelligent character has a 10. Most of them have an 8 or a 9. So, but they did a really good job of role playing their characters as not being smart, but still following the story. So they're still investigating the murder, but it took on an almost like Zoolander kind of tone, right? Of like the files are in the computer. You know, so it turned out to be far more comedic than I expected it to be, given this, you know, dark and supernatural nature of this, you know, this murderer, right? But my players did a really good job of sticking to the story, you know, recognizing that as a game master, I've prepared this adventure, and they engaged fully with the adventure, but they engaged in it in a way that I totally didn't expect, being much more comedic. And, you know, so that, you know, that's another aspect of the collaborative storytelling process is, you know, how are the players reacting? Like Jim said, are they going to actually follow the breadcrumbs? Or are they going to do something different? But even if they follow the breadcrumbs, what tone and what type of character interaction are they bringing to those breadcrumbs, right? And all of that can dramatically impact the outcome and the story that evolves from there.
Yeah.
I think when you go through like a video game or you go through like a movie or something or a book, the narrative the plot is always the same, and there are ways that an author or a creator can leave little breadcrumbs, as you say, to lead people to the story that they want to tell. But it's ultimately up to the receiver to determine what that story is. The interesting thing about D&D is not only can you change the story and the perception of it as players and characters, you can change the plot, which fundamentally changes the story. So it's really difficult, even as a DM, to really get into a loop that isn't controlled by the player's interests.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's most fun about the tabletop experience for me, is that while I definitely have ideas and, you know, intentions behind the NPCs and monsters I design, the players will often unpack those things in ways that I never expected, and the story just goes in interesting directions that I wasn't prepared for. But that excitement of, ooh, how are we doing this? What are you doing? You know, that I find that exciting and intriguing, right? Of how they unpack those events. A couple years ago, my campaign, I planned out a very like Game of Thrones-esque political intrigue campaign, and then all my players showed up with anthropomorphic animals, right? So like there were 3 tabaxi and a heron and a what's the fish, the lokatha.
Yeah.
We still use the same sandbox. We still use a lot of the same adventures that I had set aside in the sandbox, but the tone was completely different. It went from what I was thinking was going to be more like Game of Thrones to like Muppet Treasure Island, because they all wanted to be pirates on top of it. So they engaged in the political aspects of the sandbox, but they did it as pirates, and they established a trade company. So they had this trade company that was becoming successful because they were the only shipping company that could outrun the pirates. But it was because they were also the pirates, so they weren't attacking their own ships. Mm-hmm. So they still engaged with the political aspect of the campaign, but they did it in this whole piracy and like West India Trading Company kind of way.
Fred in chat says, I think gameplay loop should allow players to create the story. You need a key or thing to open the door. Progress. Time and Tell says, as BLM has said tons of times, the human mind will find and create story where it doesn't exist. Even when you go crawl dungeons, you'll find a narrative along the way.
Yep.
That reminds me what Stephen King said about theme and on writing. He said, never write theme in your first draft. You just write your first draft, and you go back and through it, and the theme will make itself known to you. All players expect Lord of the Rings. All games become Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Yeah, that's true. Talking about Herringons, I love Herringons. I played a Herringon rogue in a campaign. I played a Herringon Echo Knight fighter in a campaign. That rogue. I also played a Herringon Drake Warden I was in a very short-lived Curse of Strahd campaign, and I love playing Herringon because I love being able to talk about my 143 brothers, my 147 sisters, and talk about how I worship the dirt god, the orange one, and always talking about the sacred vegetable. Like there's so much room there for great bunny puns. Yeah, when you're playing a Herringon. I didn't realize I played one 3 separate times. That's a lot. That's excessive. They're fun though. Herringons are great.
The Herringon in that campaign played a cleric, and she also had like the vegetable god.
Yeah.
But as a player, she's also the one that likes to play the most good character of the group. So she often turns into kind of the mother hen of the group, trying to keep everybody else out of trouble, which is really funny as like a rabbit. Like she's literally describing herself hopping around the group, like, hopping circles around the group, trying to keep everybody together and keep them from wandering off and doing stupid stuff.
Nice. So unless anyone has anything else to say about gameplay, loop, and story, I know it's kind of a heady topic. I thought the chat might not be very active around it because it's the kind of thing that you kind of got to think about for a little while. It's one of the most ephemeral pieces of our... Anyway, moving on to our main subject that we usually get to halfway or more through the show. We're going to talk about the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide. It doesn't officially come out until next Tuesday, but we're all cool, so we have the Dungeon Master's Guide already. Not really. They had it in my friendly local game store early. And I didn't ask questions. I saw it and I grabbed it.
Same.
But so last week, Brad and Ryan and I gave some kind of overall thoughts. And when we brought this up to Sean in our chat, he said he had lots of thoughts about the DMG. So I want to hear those thoughts. Sean, what do you think about the DMG? And then maybe we'll talk about the chapter 1 after that.
Yeah. So I bought the DMG at my local game store. Immediately started reading it because we just the day I bought it was the last session of my 2014 5e campaign. So I immediately went into prepping for my 2024 campaign, and going through it, I got to say, I'm impressed across the board. Really good systems, really good ways to diversify and make your game a lot more interesting. In this first chapter specifically, though, I have 3 things, but really 2 things that I think are really awesome. The first one is this thing called the 1 hour guideline. Basically, it gives a breakdown of the things that you can reasonably do in 1 hour of gameplay. And judging by a 3 to 4 hour session, you can assumedly do a lot of these things and have like a full session kind of built out. So it really tells you what you should have prepared in case your players want to do certain things. But on top of that as well, they have a section called preparation time, which I really like, which is if you have an hour in your week to prep, these are the things to prep. If you have 2 hours, do everything from 1 hour and these 2 extra things. If you have 3 hours, do everything from the 1 hour, the second hour, and these few extra things at the end. And I think that's really helpful for people who, I mean, I know a lot of people who struggle to find times to plan things out. And having this set aside time, this 1 hour a week, completely doable. And so I think kind of giving a breakdown of, what you should prep in that time is really helpful for new time GMs or people who are just looking to, find a system that works for them.
Yeah, Purple Bite asked, do I like it, and is there anything new or original? And there's not a whole lot that's new, and there's not a lot that's original. I just think it's more efficiently designed than previous DMGs, and I think it's in some ways better written when you better written for an audience of new game masters. I think it does a better job of explaining things and helping new game masters.
Yeah, about things being original. I guess it depends on how many editions of D&D you've played, whether or not it will be original to you.
That's a good point.
I clocked stuff from 4E DMG on the first page, and that doesn't bother me. It was good stuff that they included from the 4E DMG there, but I feel like this is, at least particularly in this first chapter here, maybe we can start taking a look at it. Particularly in this first chapter, it's written in plain conversational language that I really appreciate. It says, hey, here's how you play a game. You describe the scene, you listen to them, you adjudicate the results. It's very cut and dried. Here's what you do. Here's what you're going to need. It's just you need a journal and you need a pencil and all that kind of stuff. It's very clear exactly what you need, exactly how to run the game. I feel like the very opening here where it says the DM gets to play many fun roles: actor, director, improviser, referee, storyteller, teacher, world builder. This is funny because Chris Perkins gave a lecture at some conference 6 or 9, maybe 12 months ago, and then he did a sit down with Todd Kenrick after, and basically gave the presentation to Todd as a video. And this is all the stuff, all that stuff from that presentation is in this chapter. You could tell Perkins was probably writing it at the time and had to go give a lecture. So he's like, oh crap, I'll just take my slide deck from, that I've been showing to the Hasbro uppers to demonstrate. Sean talked about the preparing the session, and I'm gonna have to do a search for a place here, but it says there was one step in there. Okay, it says if you have 1 hour, do these 3 things. If you have 2 hours, do this additional thing. Then it says if you have 3 hours, create a new encounter designed specifically to appeal to one player or alter an existing encounter to relate to the goals and motivations of that player's character. Over the course of several sessions, do this for all your players and characters. I would strongly encourage you to do this with your 1 hour prep. Just make a habit of doing this always, that your story should always involve your players in some way. Because it says back in step 2, identify the encounters you want to run. Well, I don't think it would be that much more work to take a quick review of your PC's backstories and think, is there some way that I can loop in some element or some recurring element that maybe isn't related to a PC backstory, but maybe something that one PC cares about, so you can engage that person. I think that should just be standard. I don't think you should save that for when you have 3 hours of prep time.
I agree.
Go ahead, Brad.
If we were to compare this list to Mike Shea's 8 steps of from the Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, his step number 1 is review the characters. Right, he starts with the characters and builds from there. And I've had good experience using those steps in that way. So I agree with you. I think this, what are they calling it? Step 9 should be moved to up to like step 1.
Yeah. Where's the rule of? I want to read that. The rule of fun. I thought this was interesting. D&D is a game and everyone should have fun playing it. Everyone shares equal responsibility in moving the game along, and everyone contributes to the fun when they treat each other with respect and consideration. Talking through disagreements among players or their characters, and remembering that arguments or mean-spirited squabbles can get in the way of fun. People have many different ideas about what makes D&D fun. The quote-end-quote right way to play D&D is the way you and your players agree to and enjoy. And that sentence right there, I'm glad to see that codified, because has that not been the social media thing that launched 1,000 ships? Everybody arguing about the right way to play D&D. So it's nice to see this codified. Actually, this should have been in the player's handbook, but it's nice to see it somewhere.
Agreed.
Because that's something I say in a lot of my videos, is that there is no right or wrong way, and if you're having fun, then you're doing it correctly. If you're not having fun, you're probably doing it incorrectly.
Well, and then the section right below that, again, going to like good layout, it like explains exactly what they mean by that, and they give you the different play style examples, which is part of that choice of like, how do I want to have fun as a game master? How do my players want to have fun? And what play style can we land on that's going to, meet those desires, right? Or what maybe 2 play styles can we mix together in order to, have as much fun at the table as we can as a group.
Nacho here says it might be the best laid out DMG we've had, but it reads like a greatest hits. And I hear that, but also I'm pretty sure that was their intent.
Mm-hmm.
Their intent was not to make something revolutionary, otherwise they would have had to call it 6th edition. So yeah, I hear you, Nacho. There's nothing, even Bastions is not new, but there's nothing new in here, but it's just laid out very well, and has some great advice in here. There's where's the hard and soft limits? They describe this thing called hard and soft limits, which is very much like lines and veils, but it's what they put in the game about making people comfortable at the table, and essentially they don't call it session 0, but essentially session zeroing, is way more than they've ever had in any edition before this. Which some people don't like this kind of stuff. That's fine. I do it at my table because I don't want people to be uncomfortable. But where is the thing about the respect? Oh yeah, there's this one section in here that goes hard. Maybe I could actually respect for the players. Your players need to know from the start you run a game that's fun, fair, and tailored for them. Do you really do that? Can players retract what they just said the characters did? There's some good advice here for things like, there is new stuff in here that wasn't in 2014, because they just didn't think about this kind of stuff in 2014. Like letting players, like, if you said it, your character did it, or should you let the player change their mind? I don't think this was in the 2014 DMG. If it was, it wasn't memorable. But this kind of like plain language stuff, like there was a section in here before about, what was I looking for?
But I think you're right as far as that goes. That line of like letting players retract something they just did. especially if it's, it was something that was done in the moment and maybe a little out of hand. I think allowing that probably would avoid a lot of the Reddit horror stories that we see, right? Letting the player go, well, maybe my character wouldn't do that.
Oh, this was the section I was thinking about earlier. Sorry, I went off on a long tangent there where I couldn't find it. The social contract of adventurers. I find this section very interesting. You must provide reasonably appealing reasons for characters to undertake the adventures you prepare. In exchange, the players should go along with those hooks. It's okay for your players to give you some pushback on why their characters should want to do what you're asking them to do, but it's not okay for them to invalidate the hard work you've done preparing the adventure by willfully going in a different direction. What do you guys think about that?
I agree with Mike M, who says that kind of thing should have been in the player's handbook.
Yeah.
But I 100% agree with it, right? And that's kind of what I was describing with my players last night. Like, they made these characters that really weren't built for a murder investigation, but they knew that's what I had prepped, so they played along. But we found a way to marry the two, right? So it was, it was more comedic, right? But they didn't just totally just go off the rails. And we've all seen those comments online where somebody posts how proud they are for undermining the DM's story. Right? Oh, it's so funny. I completely derailed the campaign because my player did XYZ and the DM didn't expect it. And next thing you know, we totally had to change the game and force the DM to improv the rest of the session. How cool is that?
I was gonna say, so in communication theory, which is my study or my field of study, we have a thing called symbolic convergence theory, where something occurs called a fantasy chain, which basically is the essence of D&D. People basically dogpiling on a fanciful element of something, building onto it, and then using that as a way to build cohesion as a group. One of the things you need, though, in order to make a fantasy chain is for people to buy into it. And if you can't buy into it, if you refuse to, you basically destroy any possibility of creating that fantasy chain and creating symbolic convergence, which is the whole process of imagining the same thing as a group. So the social contract that exists between the DMs and the players is, if you go on this thing that I prepared, we will all be able to engage in it and make a story. But a player just turning away, or a DM forcing something to happen, that's going to just immediately kill any kind of prospect of the game working out the way you imagine it to. So yeah, I think it's incredibly important. I think it should have been mentioned in the PHB as well.
Yeah, that sounds like a cool discussion, Sean. Maybe we should to do a video on that together.
Oh yeah, I got all my class notes in here. I have so much about my degree.
Well, my degree is in marriage and family therapy. So,
okay.
So a lot of like systems theory that we use in marriage and family therapy is based on communication theory. So like our headspaces are probably very similar.
Most likely, yes.
My degree's in psychology. Also, we got a lot of nerds on this stream right now. A lot of nerds. I retired from mental health work, though. Hopefully, Brad, you can get out someday, too.
I only do it part-time anyway, so...
Okay,
yeah.
Good for you. Yeah. I loved and I hated mental health work, both. Loved it and hated it.
Yes.
So what else do you guys want to say about this first chapter here?
I think there's a lot of good things to say about this first chapter. I think, Jem, maybe you were the one who said it last week. Like, there's nothing here that's really like groundbreaking for an experienced DM. I feel like an experienced DM is going to be like, oh yeah, I do that, or yeah, I have my version of that, right? But again, this isn't just targeted to the experienced DM, right? And I think there's a lot of good content here, even though, you know, kind of the initial temptation I had was like, oh yeah, I know this stuff. But I think this first chapter is a very solid first chapter.
D&D is by definition a very high context hobby, in terms of, in order to play it, you need to understand the ins and outs of it. And usually that's passed down by either just playing with an experienced player or an experienced dungeon master, or being able to learn it from like videos and stuff like that. So anything that edges closer to being able to explain it in a low context environment to players is a big win, because that means that we're going to have more people picking up this book, reading through that first chapter, and then having a general idea of what to do, even without kind of branching out into other mediums to learn. So I see it as a huge win. It's not necessarily a chapter for me as somebody who's played for so long, but even I, with the prep time thing, saw that and went, I can take lessons from that. I can learn from this. So I think it's a definitely a good intro.
Yeah, for sure. And it's definitely much better. I just pulled up the 2014 DMG than the first chapter, which was A World of Your Own. The big picture, gods of your world, mapping your campaign, right? You know, very, very top-down campaign design approach in that first chapter of the 2014 DMG. You know, but like we've discussed before, we kind of assumed that DMG was targeted to experienced game masters. But yeah, and I think, you know, what Sean is saying about, like, you know, building solid foundation for good communication, that might actually be, you know, a good thing for the hobby overall if you start training DMs, because, you know, the meta of the game, the conversations we have outside of the game, as we've seen, especially, you know, all of last year, there was a lot of not listening and not understanding what other people's points of view were, and the whole conversation about the game was pretty aggressive and not always healthy, right? So not only does teaching people how to, you know, communicate well make better game masters at the table, hopefully that'll have a better impact on the community as a whole, as we, you know, communicate about the game outside of the game.
I want to bring up this thing that AI Ed here says. Also, AI Ed, you do not have our permission to use this stream to train your language model. But AI Ed says, mixed feelings on this thing of just go with whatever the DM is doing. I feel like yes and no too much to type to explain. I see where you're coming from. That thing about the social contract of play, I'm not 100% sure I agree with it. I have some reservations about players being able to go off and do what they want. I think in some circumstances that's perfectly okay and should be allowed, or at least not frowned upon.
Could I ask a question?
Go ahead.
I assume you mean like in a game where like that is kind of a big part of it, like an open world experience where you're able to go off and there's no main quest. You can say no to a quest and go do your own thing with your autonomy as a player.
You know, I feel like if the question is, the quest giver comes in and says, my daughter has been kidnapped by goblins. They took her into the forest. I need 5 brave adventurers. Oh, look, here's 5 brave adventurers right here. 4 of them go, yeah. And then the other person is like, goblins, I don't know. That there has to be, I guess I don't have a fully formed opinion on if that person says, I don't want to go do that. I don't think they should be shunned. But I also don't think it's completely on the dungeon master then to create a side adventure for that person to not go with the goblins. There's there's some kind of communication that exists to create a happy medium there, and I don't exactly know what it is.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's a nuanced conversation. If we're talking about like training dungeon masters, right, teaching new DMs how to do that and how to create space for that, I think there's definitely good DM tips that'll allow you to have another reason for the player to go on that adventure, right? So number one, it's not just the goblins kidnapped my daughter. It's also, I'll pay you to go save her, and the goblins live in this dungeon that is rumored to have a magic sword at the bottom of it, right? So now you have more than one reason to go on the quest, right?
Also, it's the magic sword that belonged to your grandfather once upon a time.
Yeah, there you go. Right?
Then that should hook them. Yeah, that's a good point, Brad.
And some of that can be on the players too. Like an experienced player might throw that out there, right? The part about the magic sword that so a good player could come up with a different reason to go, right? Yeah, I don't really want to fight goblins, but I swore a life debt to the dwarf because he saved me from the troll that one time. So, I'll go because you want to go, right? You can find ways in character to go with the group, right? And that's part of the collaborative process. But there's also the idea as a DM that when you build an adventure, right, you can have other things in the sandbox, right? So that if the players do go off the rails, like, I always design my campaign usually with 4 factions, right? And so when I plan a dungeon or an adventure, it's around one of my factions. And if the players don't bite and they want to do something else, then I just have them run into one of my other factions in the game. And I have, kind of a template I use to lay out the factions, so no matter what level they are, I can throw together a combat encounter based on that other faction that they, that they run into when they go off the rails.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of ways to design your gameplay that gives your player more options, so they have the space to say no to stuff. But that's higher level. That's more advanced skill stuff, right?
This is sort of, I think, is more closely aligned to my opinion here. Let me tell you a quick story. Let's pop back to Jim's Corner real quick. Let me tell you a story about my friend Nick.
Where's the graphic?
I think I already mentioned him earlier in this podcast. My friend, I think that was before. My friend and co-author Nick. A few years ago, I was putting together a team of authors to play Dungeons and Dragons with me, and I asked him to play. He said no, and that he had played when he was a teenager, and in this scenario, they were in a tavern, and the barkeep was giving them a quest, and he said he wanted to punch the barkeep in the face, and the GM said, no, you can't do that. And he said, well, F this game, and he never played again. And it's always broken my heart a little bit, thinking about why couldn't that GM just let him have punched the barkeeper? And I don't have a solid answer. I can't firmly land on either side of this argument because I can see both sides and I keep changing my mind.
I think that one thing to keep in mind is I saw there was a comment. It was like, in a more freeform campaign, players need motivations, and it's the DM's job to make those motivations work in the story. I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think that in and of itself is a social contract, though. The assumption that the players have the ability to turn away a quest and go on a different one. That's something that's discussed, as people are saying, in that session 0. So the situation you described with your friend, it's unfortunate, but that is a failure of the DM, not in allowing them to not punch them, but not communicating with the player beforehand about what was allowed and what wasn't allowed in their campaign. If that had been a conversation that took place beforehand, it probably would have never come to that. In communication, we actually have a phrase, which is, people always say, we want to be heard. That's entirely false. People don't want to be heard. They want to be understood. And that's the more difficult part. That takes a lot of mindfulness and listening ability.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well said.
Well, and that understanding of each other, right? That's part of the communication that needs to go on at the table. You know, like to have an idea of why this player wants to punch the bartender in the face, right? So, is there a way for me to let this happen in the game, and let the player express their character the way they want to express the character, without damaging the story that I'm trying to tell, right? So, like, so there's that agreement that you kind of come to between a game master and the players of, I'm trying to curate this story for you. I'm trying to, design this game for you. But at the same time, I'm a player too, and I want to have fun with this as well. Right. So there's that communication of, what is the purpose? I have players who will text me ahead of time and be like, I had a really rough day today. We need some combat in tonight's game. Right. That's great communication on my part, on their part, that helps me as a DM, that I know outside of the game, they've had a rough day and they want to beat somebody up. Right. So I now know their intention when they come into my game table. Right. And so that having that understanding of not just what you want to do, but why you want to do it, and understanding, those player motives. And, sometimes you end up treading into some, kind of sticky stuff when players start like working out childhood issues with their D&D character, right? So that's something to be aware of too, right?
Yeah. Did my friend have a session 0? He told me he was told he could do whatever he wanted in the game. There's that D&D, you could do whatever you want. No, you can't, except for that. You can't,
Yeah,
you can't punch that horse. No.
If you tell the players that, right?
But
then
I
you should
punch a horse.
I mean, Conan did it in the first movie. He punched the horse in the mouth. I think it was the first movie. Or was it a camel? Maybe there was a horse in one movie and a camel in the other. But Conan had a habit of punching animals in the face.
That's not very nice. Well, I think we could go in and talk about Chapter 2, but this kind of feels like a good place to stop. We've done a lot of philosophizing today, and my brain is sore. We talked about a lot of very deep tabletop topics on the show today. Maybe there's a pretty good place to go wrap up. Go follow the Landlocked Warlocks. Also, the camel did that. The camel was asking for it. Well, what was the camel wearing?
Oh God.
Hey, that's a show I do that's a joke I do at the end of the show. That's not a beginning of the show joke. That's the end of the show joke when everybody's clicked away already. Sean, tell the people who you are and where they can find you.
You can find me on Delver. That's pretty much it. I just have the YouTube cover. I haven't made a video in a long while. I should probably do that, but mostly videos about D&D, its history, and kind of nebulous things like communication studies in relation to it.
Cool. This guy over here is, and any last words he wants to say?
I'm Brad Wolf with Dire Den, and Jim showed that list of Chris Perkins of the different aspects of being a DM, the referee, the storyteller, right? All those different roles of the game master. I currently have a series that I'm about halfway through of a bunch of interviews I did with a variety of different game masters where we talk about every one of those roles. So there's a series of videos that are still on their way. The rest of that series is coming out over the next couple weeks.
And I'm in one of them.
That's right. I actually just re-edited the one of yours into a shorter bite-sized version to advertise the original.
Nice. So look for that on Dire Den. And I am GM Jim Heskett, and thank you for watching. Thanks, Sean. As far as we know, Ryan may or may not be back next week. We'll have to see. I'll keep checking the news bulletins for information about him. All right, guys. Thanks for coming. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.